message to Vladimir Putin?
Mr. Putin, did you underestimate Ukraine?
We are about to witness a repeat of one of the most dangerous diplomatic moments in recent history. Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin are meeting alone this Friday in Alaska. No advisors, no Ukraine. Just two men in a room deciding the fate of a war that's already killed hundreds of thousands. Sound familiar? It should, because we have seen this movie before.
President Trump is arriving right now at the presidential palace in Helsinki, Finland, for his first summit with President Putin.
July 2018, Helsinki, Finland. Trump walks out of a private meeting with Putin and does something no American president has ever done. He sides with Russia over his own intelligence agencies. On live television in front of the world, the question wasn't subtle. A reporter asked Trump about Russian election interference. Trump responds. Putin told him Russia didn't do it, and Trump believed him. Fiona Hill was Trump's top Russia advisor at the time. She was watching from the side of the stage. She later said she considered pulling a fire alarm just to end the press conference. Think about that. A senior White House official wanted to fake an emergency to stop her own president from talking. Now we are doing it again. Same format, same players, higher stakes. This Friday's meeting happens at Elmendorf Air Base in Alaska. The location isn't random. Alaska used to belong to Russia. They sold it to America in 1867 for $7 million. Putin knows this. Trump knows this. It's symbolism Putin loves. The White House is calling this a listening exercise. That's diplomatic speak for we have no idea what's going to happen. Trump himself said it's a feel out meeting. He'll know in the first few minutes if Putin wants a ceasefire. But here's what makes this terrifying. Ukraine won't be there. The country actually fighting this war gets no seat at the table. Trump has already started talking about land swapping. He says there will be some territory exchanges between Russia and Ukraine for Ukraine's own good. The problem is Ukraine controls almost none of Russian territory. So what exactly would they be swapping? Vladimir Zelensky made his position crystal clear. Ukraine will not give land to the occupier. Period. European leaders agree you can't negotiate away someone else's country without them in the room. Putin sees this differently. He wants four entire Ukrainian regions: Donetsk, Kherson, Luhansk, and Zaporizhia. Russia already claims to own these areas. They just don't fully control them yet. Putin's demand would force Ukraine to abandon what military experts call their fortress belt. These are major cities with defense systems Ukraine has spent 11 years building. The timing isn't coincidental either. Russian forces are advancing in eastern Ukraine right now. They are gaining ground around the coal mining town of Dobropilia. Putin wants battlefield leverage before he sits down with Trump. The stronger his position on the ground, the more he can demand at the negotiating table. But let's talk about why Trump and Putin meeting alone is problematic. It's not just Helsinki, it's a pattern. In 2017, they met at the G20 summit in Hamburg, just the two of them and translators. Senior Trump officials later admitted they had no idea what was discussed. After one meeting, Trump reportedly asked his translator for his notes. That's not normal presidential behavior. Fiona Hill, who watched these dynamics up close, said it simply: Trump just wings it. He doesn't prepare like other presidents. Putin, on the other hand, loves this kind of sparring match. He prides himself on thinking quickly in these situations. It's a mismatch. One leader does his homework, the other improvises. In Helsinki, when they tried to make a deal, Trump came out claiming he and Putin agreed that US law enforcement could question the Russian intelligence officials who interfered in American elections. Sounds reasonable, right? Wrong. Putin's version was different. He said Russia would get access to Americans who pushed for something called the Magnitsky Act. These are sanctions that target Russian officials for human rights abuses. Putin wanted to interrogate American citizens as payback. Trump apparently didn't understand what Putin had actually proposed. The deal went nowhere. But imagine if it hadn't. Imagine if Trump had accidentally agreed to hand over American citizens to Russian interrogation. That's the danger of winging it with Vladimir Putin. The current situation makes this even riskier. Putin is under an international arrest warrant for war crimes in Ukraine. Most of world leaders won't meet with him at all. Trump giving him this platform is already a victory for Moscow. European leaders are worried, really worried. They had a virtual meeting with Trump on Wednesday. According to diplomats who were there, Trump made some reassuring statements. He said Ukrainian territory isn't his to negotiate. He talked about supporting security guarantees for Ukraine. but Trump often tells different groups what they want to hear. European leaders got reassurance, but what will Putin hear in that room on Friday? The White House keeps lowering expectations. They are calling it a listening session now. Just Trump getting Putin's perspective. But that's exactly what happened in Helsinki, a listening session that turned into a diplomatic disaster. Benjamin Goodwin for Prism Strategic Intelligence makes a crucial point. This meeting is based on something totally impossible, land swapping that Ukraine and Europe will never accept. When your starting premise is impossible, how do you get to a successful outcome? You don't, which means this meeting serves someone else's purposes. Putin gets legitimacy. He gets to look like a world leader again instead of a war criminal. He gets photos with the American presidents. He gets to divide the West by creating doubt about American support for Ukraine. The venue selection tells its own story. The White House wanted to avoid hosting Putin on a military base. Bad optics, they thought. But they ran out of options. It's peak tourist season in Alaska. Nothing else was available that met security requirements. So Putin gets to visit on American military installation in territory that used to be Russian while under a war crimes warrant. John Bolton, Trump's former national security advisor, said the only better place for Putin would be Moscow itself. That's a harsh statement from someone who worked closely with Trump. The contrast with how other presidents handle Putin is striking. When Joe Biden met Putin in Geneva in 2021, they announced the meeting 3 weeks ahead of time. Months of preparation followed. Biden's team planned everything down to the smallest details. What time each leader would arrive, how long each session would last, even what flowers would be on the table. Biden spent days in intensive preparation. He consulted other world leaders about how to approach Putin. By the time they met, American officials knew exactly what they wanted to accomplish. Trump's approach is the opposite. Minimal preparation, no clear agenda, maximum unpredictability. That unpredictability cuts both ways. It can frustrate adversaries who prefer more structured negotiations. China's Xi Jinping reportedly wants extensive advance work before meeting Trump for exactly this reason. But unpredictability combined with limited preparation is dangerous when dealing with someone like Putin. He's prepared, he knows what he wants, he's skilled at these kinds of negotiations. The stakes couldn't be higher. This isn't just about Ukraine anymore. It's about whether aggression pays off in the 21st century, whether international law matters, whether smaller countries can count on American protection. Putin invaded in a democratic neighbor. He's deliberately targeted civilians. He's kidnapped Ukrainian children and sent them to Russia for re education. These are not accidents of war, they are systematic policies. If Putin gets what he wants in Alaska, if he keeps stolen territory and avoids accountability, what message does that send to other would be aggressors? To China looking at Taiwan, Friday's meeting isn't just about ending one war, it's about preventing the next ones. The danger isn't that Trump wants to help Putin. The danger is that Trump might accidentally help Putin while thinking he is solving problems. Good intentions combined with poor preparations and skilled manipulation can produce terrible outcomes. We have seen this before. We know how it ends. The question is whether we are about to see it again. Do you think this Alaska meeting will end differently than Helsinki? Or are we about to watch Trump hand Putin another diplomatic victory? Drop your predictions in the comments below.
US President Donald Trump is waging an aggressive tariff strategy against friend and foe alike.
When Donald Trump slapped a brutal 50% tariff on Brazil last month, he wasn't just targeting their exports. He was essentially weaponizing trade policy to pressure Brazil over their prosecution of Jair Bolsonaro. Think about that for a moment. The world's largest economy is now using economic warfare to interfere in another nation's judicial system. This story gets even more fascinating when you realize what's actually happening behind the scenes. And if you want to stay ahead of these major geopolitical shifts that are reshaping our world, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Trump's aggressive tariff strategy might be achieving the exact opposite of what he intended. Instead of bringing countries to heel, he's actually pushing them together in ways that could fundamentally reshape global trade. Let's start with the sheer scale of what we are witnessing. Since what Trump calls Liberation Day back in April, the US has imposed new export duties on nearly 90 countries. countries. We are talking about both traditional allies and nations that barely trade with America. The EU, which previously enjoyed single digit tariffs, now faces 15% duties after they quickly capitulated rather than fight a prolonged trade war. Brazil is hitting back hard with no deal in sight. India just got slammed with tariffs that doubled from 25% to 50% because they won't stop buying Russian oil. China continues to refuse American demands, although talks are ongoing. Russia faces the threat of even tougher secondary sanctions if they don't agree to a Ukraine ceasefire. Now, here's where Trump's strategy starts to unravel. Take Brazil's situation. That 50% tariff isn't really about trade imbalances. It's Trump's way of pressuring Brazil to drop their case against Bolsonaro, who is accused of plotting a coup. Brazilian officials have made it crystal clear they won't be bullied this way. The India situation is equally revealing. Trump claims they are funding Russia's war machine by buying oil, but India has a compelling counter-argument. European countries and even the US continue substantial trade with Moscow when it suits their interests. The oil price cap system that Western nations designed actually created incentives for countries like India to buy more Russian crude, refine it, and profit from the arbitrage. What's really striking is how Trump seems oblivious to the economic reality of tariffs. These are not taxes paid by foreign countries, they are paid by American consumers and businesses when goods arrive at US ports. We are essentially looking at what could be the largest tax increase on American consumers in modern history, and it's hitting Trump's own voter base the hardest. But the real strategic blunder goes much deeper. Trump is dismantling an 80-year-old global financial architecture that has been the foundation of American economic dominance since World War II. The Bretton Woods system, the dollar's role as the world's reserve currency, the entire framework of international trade settlement, all of this is now under threat. Consider what's happening with BRICS. These countries represent 40% of global GDP, more than double the US share. They control the majority of the world's critical resources and manufacturing capacity. Previously, BRICS operated as a loose coalition, careful not to directly confront the United States. But Trump's direct targeting of Brazil and India is changing that calculation dramatically. The recent BRICS summit was telling. Member countries deliberately avoided mentioning the US directly, trying to maintain that cautious approach. But Trump's actions since then have created new incentives for deeper cooperation. Countries that were previously hesitant about BRICS financial mechanisms are now fast tracking central bank coordination and alternative payment systems. China's response has been particularly strategic. Beijing isn't pushing for confrontation. They are simply sitting back and watching as Trump isolates America from its own allies and trading partners. Chinese officials privately describe Trump as the greatest gift China could have asked for because he is doing their work for them in undermining US global influence. The semiconductor tariff announcement perfectly illustrates this strategic confusion. Trump declared a 100% tariff on foreign made chips but then immediately offered exemptions for companies investing in US facilities. Taiwan's TSMC, Samsung, and SK Hynix all qualify these exemptions because of their existing American investments. So, who actually gets hurt? Smaller players like the Philippines, where semiconductors represent 70% of their exports. This brings us to the secondary tariff threat, which could be Trump's biggest miscalculation yet. He is threatening 100% tariffs on any country that continues buying Russian oil after this August deadline. But look at who this would actually hit. China is Russia's largest oil customer. India has dramatically increased its Russian energy purchases. Even NATO allied Turkey is a major buyer of Russian energy. More importantly, European Union countries still trade over 60 billion euros annually with Russia, and the Russian LNG imports actually increased 9% last year. Is Trump really prepared to impose punitive tariffs on his closest allies to pressure Russia? The political and economic fallout would be enormous. The defense relationship with India shows how quickly these trade disputes can spill over into strategic partnerships. Reports suggest India has paused major weapons purchases from the US, including a $3.6 billion aircraft deal and advanced missile system. While India denies these reports as fabricated, the mere fact that such speculation exists shows how Trump's trade policy is undermining critical security relationships. What we are witnessing is a fundamental restructuring of global trade patterns. Countries are actively diversifying away from the US markets and dollar denominated transactions. BRICS nations are accelerating work on alternative payment systems. While they are not ready to launch a new reserve currency, they are building the infrastructure that could eventually challenge dollar dominance. The historical precedent here is sobering. When countries imposed widespread tariffs in the 1930s, the impact on global trade was catastrophic. Confidence collapsed, investment plummeted, and the world spiraled into depression. Economic textbooks universally warn against this kind of unilateral tariff strategy. Yet Trump seems convinced he can somehow make it work. Perhaps most ironically, Trump's approach combines two contradictory psychological elements that make for terrible policy. There's this profound self-confidence that America can bully everyone into submission, paired with an extraordinary sense of victimhood that the most powerful nation on earth is somehow being cheated by countries that can barely feed themselves. Appeals courts are reviewing Trump's authority to impose these sweeping tariffs, with Trump himself warning of another Great Depression if the courts rule against him. The constitutional and legal framework simply wasn't designed for this kind of economic warfare. The coffee industry offers a perfect microcosm of how this plays out in practice. Many US companies source their beans from Brazil, from major chains down to small local roasters. That 50% tariff isn't hurting Brazil as much as it's forcing American businesses to absorb higher costs or pass them on to consumers who are already dealing with inflation. Looking ahead, the implications are staggering. If Trump continues down this path, we could see the emergence of a genuinely multipolar economic system much faster than anyone anticipated. BRICS and other regional blocs are gaining momentum not because they are inherently anti-American, but because America is positioning itself as anti-everyone else. The ultimate irony is that Trump's trade strategy might succeed in forging new alliances, just not the kind he intended. By creating a common external threat, he is giving desperate nations powerful incentives to coordinate their responses and reduce their dependence on American markets and systems. We are witnessing the potential end of an era where the US could unilaterally reshape global trade through economic pressure. The question now isn't whether other countries will adapt to Trump demands, but whether America is prepared for a world where its economic leverage has been fundamentally diminished by its own actions. Speaking of fundamental changes in global power dynamics, if you found this analysis valuable, I would love to hear your thoughts. Do you think Trump's tariff strategy will ultimately backfire and accelerate to America's decline as the dominant global economic power? Or could this aggressive approach somehow force other nations to back to negotiating table on US terms? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and don't forget to subscribe for more in-depth analysis of the geopolitical forces shaping our world. When Ford had to shut down its Chicago plant last May, most people assumed it was just another supply chain hiccup. But the real story was far more alarming. Ford couldn't get the rare earth magnets needed for their SUVs because China had effectively turned off the tap. This wasn't an accident or a logistics problem. This was Beijing flexing what might be its most powerful economic weapon against the United States. China doesn't just dominate rare earth metals, they control them with surgical precision. We are talking about 90% of global processing capacity and nearly 70% of mining production. But here's what makes this truly dangerous. China has spent the last 15 years systematically transforming a chaotic industry into a centralized weapon of economic warfare. Let me explain what rare earth elements actually are, because the name is misleading. These are not the rare in traditional sense. There are 17 metallic elements with names like neodymium, dysprosium, and terbium. What makes them special isn't their scarcity, but their unique properties. They create the strongest permanent magnets known to science. They are 20 to 40% more energy efficient than ordinary motors, and they are absolutely essential for modern technology. Think about your smartphone. The speaker, the vibration motor, even the screen relies on rare earths. That Tesla in your neighbor's driveway, its motor contains powerful neodymium magnets. The wind turbines generating clean energy. Each offshore turbine needs about 4 tons of rare earth magnets. F-35 fighter jets, missile guidance systems, MRI machines, they all depend on these elements. Here's where China's strategy becomes brilliant and terrifying. In 2010, China's rare earth industry was a mess. Hundreds of independent miners and processors operated with minimal oversight. Smuggling was rampant, environmental damage was catastrophic. Beijing had the resources but lacked control. But then something remarkable happened. Over 15 years, China technically consolidated this entire industry. By 2013, they had reduced hundreds of operators to just 10 authorized producers. Today, only two state-owned giants control the entire sector. China Rare Earth Group dominates the southern deposits rich in heavy rare earths.